People are such bastards, and it's scientifically proven. Take at least their sick desire for crazy experiments, which they put on both their smaller brothers and their own kind. Today, I'll talk about several of such not very humane experiments, and you should not repeat them at home in any case without me. Like and subscribe, and let's get started. At the end of the 18th century, a law passed in Scotland, according to which the bodies of executed people were transferred to medical schools. Various experiments were conducted on them, or they were played during breaks. This is how the body of Matthew Clydesdale, executed by a murderer, found its way to a mad scientist named Andrew Ure. In general, Andrew was a geologist, but also something of a chemist himself. He was fond of anatomy, and he believed that an electric current could resurrect the dead. He saw that the current made the dead frogs move, and no, I don't know why he made the dead frogs move with the current, but our Frankenstein was so different that he decided to do the same with a person. It's interesting that in those days, it wasn't known that an electric shock could restart the heart, but the smartest and the craziest ones were already on the way to this discovery. On November 14, 1818, Ure conducted his experiment in front of a live audience. He made an incision on the dead man's neck, exposing the spine, and connected batteries to it, sending high-voltage discharges. At the very first discharge, the body began to react. The dead man's face contorted into a terrible grimace, and his arms and legs began to move. To the cheers of the crowd, Ure tried to stimulate the dead man's lungs to get him breathing, and it worked. However, due to massive blood loss, Matthew never fully recovered. As far as it's known, the scientist failed to repeat the experiment, but he assured that if it were not for the loss of blood, the killer would have returned to the world of the living and would have continued to do his good deeds. As you can see, medicine used to be synonymous with the word hardcore. Fractures were treated with amputations. Anesthesia was administered by hitting the head with something heavy, and as a preventative measure, doctors prescribed drugs that are used to poison rats today. At the beginning of the 20th century, researchers very actively used radium in their experiments. Some studied genetics, and some tried to treat cancer with it. People simply glowed with happiness from such a drug. As you might guess, they died pretty quickly from such a dose of radiation.
Oops.
Thus, at the beginning of the 20th century, a drug called Radithor, or simply radium, appeared, which was supposed to improve well-being. Once upon a time, there was a man called Eben Byers. One day, he fell out of bed, hurt his arm, and a not-so-clever doctor prescribed him Radithor. Advertising and the placebo effect did the incredible. Byers began to feel better, so he increased the dose from 1 spoon to 3 bottles a day. 3 years later, the poor man's jaw fell off. I think he was very surprised. Due to exposure to radiation, tissues, bones, and nerves were simply disintegrating from the inside, so he felt no pain. The jaw could not be brought back, so soon the unfortunate Byers died. The Radithor was banned, and 30 years later, what was left of Byers was unearthed for research. It turned out that his bones were still extremely radioactive. People are very easily fooled, and one can trick them to do terrible things. In 1971, psychology professor Philip Zimbardo conducted a rather specific social experiment to investigate the human nature. He created a prison and paid college students to play guards and prisoners. The experiment, which was supposed to last for 2 weeks, was closed after only 6 days, when the situation finally got out of control and the role-playing game turned into a night of terror of a mad patient. In just a few days, the prisoners became depressed and showed signs of extreme stress. They would not have fallen into depression. Those who played guards got too used to their roles, and almost at the beginning they turned into real sadists, humiliating the prisoners, persecuting and intimidating them. At one point, things got so bad for the prisoners that they rebelled and blocked the cellar door using their beds. Then the guards finally caved in and forced the prisoners to sleep naked on the concrete next to buckets that were used as toilets. The experiment was criticized for its lack of reliability because its leader incited the guards to behave like real bastards, and some of the prisoners faked their emotional breakdowns in order to get out of the pleasant place faster and not go cuckoo in reality. But if you've ever wondered, what happens when you put good people in bad situations? This experiment might give you a rough answer, and you won't like it very much. Well, quite expected, to be honest. It's not for nothing that we have endless wars. During World War II, people faced a lot of problems, and mass bombing was not the worst of them. total famine has become a terrible reality for all European countries, so scientists have decided that it's time to investigate how famine affects people. Spoiler, it was very bad. In 1944, the USA conducted an experiment. They selected 36 men who kept a strict diet of cabbage, beets, milk, rye bread, and beans for 3 months. In general, 1,800 calories per day, or less. In addition, they were supposed to run 22 miles every week, but there was one but. Their route passed through bakeries and restaurants. 3 participants could not stand it and left almost immediately. The rest lost 25% of their body weight. Almost all suffered from anemia, apathy, and exhaustion. Their legs became as thin as their arms, and their ribs showed through their skin. The subjects even started collecting cookbooks just so they could look at the food. It took the participants several years to return to normal weight and normal food intake after such an experiment. The horror lies in the fact that these people agreed to the experiment voluntarily, while hundreds of millions of people were forced to starve. Yes, people love to conduct inhumane experiments involving food, especially when fate herself throws them an object to study. In 1822, Surgeon William Beaumont had a very interesting patient, Alexis St. Martin, who accidentally got a bullet in the stomach. He came to the store and got into a shootout. Things happen. In those days, patients usually died from such injuries, but Alexis was lucky. Beaumont saved his life, although the wound on his stomach took a long time to heal, and in the end, there was a permanent opening in his abdomen through which the inside of the stomach could be seen. Beaumont realized that he could observe the digestion process through an opening almost an inch in diameter, like a window. With St. Martin out of work due to the injury, the wily Beaumont offered him a contract. In exchange for housing, food, and financial compensation, St. Martin was to work as a servant in the surgeon's family and at the same time be his subject of investigation. Over the next 10 years, Beaumont conducted hundreds of experiments to learn more about the human stomach. For example, he tied different types of food to a thread and then introduced them through an opening into the subject's stomach to watch how they were digested. He put a lot of stuff in there: chicken, beef chop, and even oysters. A few hours later, Beaumont was taking out partially digested food through the same hole. It may sound strange, but Beaumont's research was innovative at the time and very important for understanding how the stomach worked. And although the doctor's discoveries are still appreciated today, the way in which he conducted his experiments is quite questionable. Beaumont promised to sew up the man's stomach in time, but he didn't do that. It's assumed that he deliberately left the hole open during the first operation for the purpose of conducting his experiment. If this is true, then it turns out that the doctor decided to forget about such a thing as medical ethics. Wow, the things you do for the sake of science. Yes, it's pretty bold, but truly dedicated scientists put experiments on themselves. For example, Herbert Woolard and Edward Carmichael, they studied reflex pain. This is when you feel pain not in the sick part of the body, but a completely different one. For example, due to heart problems, pain may not be in the chest, but in the back, neck, or shoulders. So somehow, the idea came into their head to test this phenomenon not on anything, but on their own testicles. Why these sensitive organs? They needed to damage some internal organs, and the testicles seemed to be the most accessible because they're not vital and they're also easy to damage, if of course you don't cover them with a Blendamed toothpaste. Sorry, that's a joke for very old people. In short, one of them placed different weights on the testicles of another and recorded the impressions of the subject. The men were able to prove that damage to the testicles can cause reflex pain that spreads to the back when the weight reaches about 2 pounds. What's more, they continued the experiment by anesthetizing parts of the testicles to see how this would be reflected in reflex pain. Although the scientists eventually numbed what they believed to be every nerve leading to the testicles, they were unable to completely eliminate the pain from the pressure. That's how sensitive these organs are. By the way, the mystery of which of the two had to endure this suffering in the spirit of medieval torture remained between scientists and their testicles. The saddest thing is that technically the experiment was not scientifically based because no one, not even Woolard and Carmichael themselves, dared to repeat it. I wonder why. It must be such a pleasant procedure. And for what reward would you agree to participate in such an experiment? Write in the comments. By the way, you didn't notice how I also conducted an experiment on you and made you watch this video to the end. Thanks. Now subscribe and like, and I'll be back soon with new life facts.